it's a privilege actually for me to be here with you today. Just allow me the time to share my screen. This is a topic that has sparked a lot of interest internationally, even within the church. And so I'm hoping that today, instead of a lecture, it would rather be a conversation where we're able to speak freely about our thoughts and that we can come hopefully to the appropriate conclusions. And so you'd notice that I've entitled the presentation today, Sex Health Education Begins at Home. And so we're hoping today to review the importance of parenting, and we're going to also highlight the different type of parenting styles, because this is very key as we then proceed to outline the stages of development, and then we'll define sex health education, after which we'll outline the steps to sex health education based on age. And I have no financial interests to disclose at this point in time. So when we look at parenting, we recognize that it is of paramount importance because it really does guide the value system of children. It helps to create and enhance skills. It helps to basically provide that secure environment. It aids in socialization. It assists with emotional identification, and it does help with overall health. And by health, we're not merely speaking to the absence of disease, but rather the overall well-being in terms of social, emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being. So when we speak about parenting styles, we recognize that based on the style that a parent would basically embrace, then this will go on to determine the type of environment within which the child grows. And so I'm sure for those who are parents and who are listening, you may find that you have fallen into one of these categories, either being authoritative or being an authoritarian, and we'll define the differences here, being permissive, and hopefully we would not have fallen for a significant amount of part in our parenting to being neglectful. As you can see, in terms of the parenting styles, even though you may fall on being an authoritarian, authoritative, neglectful, etc., there really are two dimensions, either being responsive, where you're accepting and receptive of the child's emotional and developmental well-being, or a demanding parent, one who is in control of and demanding that the child be mature. And I promise you, very shortly, you'll see how the parenting styles really fit into the whole theme of sex health education, but building the right foundation is very key. And so when you think of an authoritative parent, when we look at the parenting style, you're warm, responsive, you have clear rules, high expectations, supportive, and value independence. And there is also an associated outcome: higher academic performance, better self-esteem, social skills, less mental illness, and lower delinquency. So as we go into sex health education, you'd recognize that being an authoritative parent may be the better parenting style to adopt in order to have better outcomes, not only as it relates to academic performance, but also in terms of social skills, self-esteem, which are very key in terms of having a better outcome as it relates to sex health education. The authoritarian, usually in that parenting style, the parent is unresponsive to the child. There are strict rules. Yes, there are high expectations, but the parent expects blind obedience. Sorry for the typographical error there. And we recognize that in this sort of parenting style, sex health education and being an authoritarian really don't go hand in hand. Because again, there are going to be questions as you proceed to educate regarding sex health. And so really be expecting blind obedience may result in negative outcomes. And so associated outcomes can include a lower self-esteem, poorer social skills, drug or alcohol abuse, delinquency, lower academic performance. So here in this style, you're seeing do as I say and not as I do. And we'll see how this becomes important. The permissive parent. The parent is warm and responsive, However, there are few or no rules in the household. The parent is indulgent and very lenient. And again, this may not be the best parenting style, when it comes to sex health education, because the associated outcomes include a child who has impulsive behavior, a child who's egocentric, poor social skills, and there are problematic relationships. What about the neglectful parent? Now, believe it or not, many of us have fallen into, this category at one time or another. Sometimes we find ourselves, on the phone, and don't come to me right now because I'm on my phone, or sometimes even in doing productive work, the work of the church, our gainful employment. We recognize that at some point in time, we do fall into being a neglectful parent, where at times we may be cold, unresponsive. At times the TV is the one supervising the child, and so we're not as involved, no rules, relatively indifferent. But this type of parenting style is associated with that someone who is impulsive, delinquent, can go on to utilizing drug or alcohol, as well as can have associated increase in suicide rates, or even suicidal ideation. So again, just to flip back a bit, which I don't necessarily like to do, but I think it's important here that when we're looking at our parenting styles as it relates to child care, child education, which must include sex health education, we are hoping that as parents, or persons who are preparing to be parents, we're hoping that we're warm, responsive, that we have clear rules. Yes, we have high expectations, but we're able to support our children as we hope that they achieve the expectations that we have for them, and we also value independence. And so this slide is also very important, the Erikson stages of psychosocial development. And it basically looks at the features of different stages of development. So the infancy, by infancy, we speak to basically from birth to the first year of life. During that phase, trust versus mistrust is really built. Trust versus mistrust. Early childhood, we're looking at autonomy, right? Starting to do things on your own versus shame and doubt. Okay, and you can see even in terms of potty training and so on coming in there. Preschool stage, you're very inquisitive, you're having your initiative versus guilt. School age, industry versus inferiority. Adolescence, and we're going to go through what adolescence versus adulthood, etc. mean. Identity versus role confusion. Young adulthood, intimacy versus isolation. And then we basically go all the way around to maturity, where you have ego versus despair. So this slide is important because sex health education is really not just for the teenager. And I want to bring that point home. Sex health education is really not unique to the adolescent. If you're waiting until adolescence to begin sex health education, then you have missed the boat. Anything that is done after the age of 8 years is really what is termed as corrective, i.e., or that is, the child would have already received some form of sex health education through friendship or through the school system. And unfortunately, if we as parents try to give sex health education at the time of adolescence, then we've missed the boat. And I promise we're going to get into the definition of sex health education. Here, I'm just setting the stage. And so an adolescent is an individual in the age 10 to 19-year age group. Very important. So some persons are saying, okay, when my child reaches the age of 10, I'm going to start to talk to them about sex. Too late, you've missed the boat. Youth, 15 to 24, young people, that's a generic term really, 10 to 24 years of age. And adolescence really is a phase as opposed to not being a fixed time period. So an adolescent, 10 to 19 years, whereas adolescence is a phase. So again, you're looking at puberty, you're looking at the whole process of adult identity, and you're looking at moving from dependence to relative independence. And so this slide does not project well, but of course this presentation will be shared with you. And what I want you to recognize is that in the early adolescent period, 11 to 13 years, our adolescents struggle with a sense of identity. They realize that, their parents are not perfect, and there are often times of increased conflict. There's a desire for independence, Okay, and there's what is called a rule and limit testing. So they're pushing the boundaries, trying to see how far they can go. And we recognize that the period of early adolescence is a period of experimentation. And so definitely that's why we're saying, if you're waiting until your child gets to that age of 10 to 11 to start sex health education, you've missed the boat. You recognize here that basically increased emotional stability really does not start until late adolescence, between the ages of 19 to 21 years. And so we get down to the meat of the matter. What is sex health education? Contrary to popular belief, it's not just telling a child about sex and where babies come from, but rather it is a process of providing accurate and developmentally appropriate information. You're going to be talking about the biology, the whole structure of the human body. You're going to be talking about in terms of a sociocultural aspect. How do men and women relate? The psychological aspect. What is the mental aspect behind sex health education, mental health issues, the relational aspect. And of course, as Seventh-day Adventists, we cannot forget the spiritual dimensions of sexuality. And that is actually included in the definition. So we're looking at the biology, the cultural aspect, the mental aspect, the relational aspect, and the spiritual aspect. And I dare say that sex health education is not something that is only taught, but it's also something that is demonstrated, especially as we speak to the relational and spiritual aspect. So again, if mommy and daddy are together and we don't have a good relationship, then it makes it even more difficult for me to give sex health education, because the children are looking on not only what I'm saying, but also what I as a parent am doing. And so I spoke about the anatomy, the structure of the body, sexual development, gender identity, am I male versus female, interpersonal relationships, the whole issue of affection and intimacy. We're speaking not only of sexual intimacy here, but intimacy as it relates to nurturing positive emotions, that whole issue of feeling wanted or needed, and the whole issue of body image, which we know is becoming more and more of an issue as time passes. Now, why is sex health education important? When we think of sex health education, these three things come to mind. HIV, sexually transmitted infections. There has been a change in the terminology, so we no longer say sexually transmitted diseases, and teenage pregnancy. So we know that globally, and this is from the World Health Organization, 21% of all new HIV diagnoses are among young people, ages 13 to 24, and this was in 2018. 88% being young men and 12% being women, okay? Of the sexually transmitted infections, as we now term it, half of the 20 million new STIs reported every year were among young people, ages 15 to 24. And when we think about teenage pregnancy, nearly 180,000 babies were born to teenage girls ages 15 to 19 in 2018. Based on anecdotal evidence, and by anecdotal, I mean based on our interactions, our observations in the medical field, locally and within the Caribbean region, we recognize that many of our children are having sexual intercourse for the first time, sometimes by the age of 9 or even 8, as young as that. We recognize, I can say within the last month, we have had at least 2 teenagers who are pregnant at the age of 13. And so that is why we're emphasizing that the home environment is very key to sex health education. But it goes beyond sexually transmitted infections and teenage pregnancy. Here are some additional rationale. Improved academic success is linked to appropriate sex health education. Prevention of violence in dating and bullying is linked to appropriate sex health education. Appropriate sex health education also aids in development of healthy relationships. It has also been proven to delay sexual initiation, contrary to popular belief. It reduces sexual health disparities. You know, we all know about the whole issue of being lesbian, gay, bisexual, etc., transgender. And also we find that appropriate and timely sex health education helps to improve health and socioeconomic consequences. Okay, so it really goes above and beyond sexually transmitted infections and pregnancy, which many persons think about when we think about sex health education. But we recognize the whole issue of improving academics, decreasing bullying, improving socioeconomic consequences, and delaying sexual health education. And so parents, as found by Clark M. et al., are actually the most important people in the lives of young children. It is not the school teacher, right? It is not the pastor, okay? It is not their friend, but rather the parent. And so as parents, we really cannot underestimate our role in appropriately preparing our children for the world out there. Okay, so the parent-child relationship is central to a child's growth and development. It's important for social emotional development, cognitive functioning, meaning school success, and mental and physical health. The physician cannot be the only one to be giving sex health education. Many times when persons come to us, as pediatricians, they say, Doc, can you tell him or her about sex to me, please? And I'm one who is very expressive, and I usually have, my little poker face going on, but I will pull the parent aside and say, you should have started this one before. And that is the whole issue of preparing for being a parent. It really does not start after you get pregnant, right? You really have to have that period of preparation prior to, and I dare say even in marital counseling, the whole issue of parenting should come up so that you are appropriately equipped. But the parent really should not wait on the pediatrician or the school or even the church to offer sex health education. Now, what are some of the sex education myths? It encourages sex. It does not. Rather, you are able to empower and appropriately equip your child so that you can then discourage early sex and promiscuity. Sex education normalizes teenage sex? No. Actually, sexual interest is something that is natural, and we really have to stop demonizing it. Because I'm sharing my screen, I'm not able to see the videos at this point in time, but many times when parents or even teachers have to speak about sex health education, and it's time for us to speak about the private parts, there's this giggling, chuckling, you know what I mean? Why is that so? Why is there this sort of taboo that we associate with identifying with who we are and giving the appropriate information? So again, we need to stop demonizing it. Sex health education may usurp a parent's role. Some persons think that way if it is only offered in school, but we're saying here that as a parent, since you're offering it, you're an active part of the education process. Some persons think sex health education is not meant for a child's ear. Okay, but guess what? After this session, you'll be so empowered to appropriately deliver sex health education based on the child's developmental age, and we're going to go into that shortly. It goes against my religious values. I'm a staunch Seventh-day Adventist, and I do not believe that I should be telling my 2-year-old about sex. It's unheard of. It's against the Bible. We're going to cover that myth today. It imposes on foreign cultures. Some persons culturally believe that, sex education really and truly should not be taught at a certain age, right? But we're going to say today that we're going to tailor it based on the need of the child. And some persons think it is the wrong prescription. If you lack the information as an adolescent, then you're not empowered to make the appropriate life-changing decisions. And often it's very good to share personal experiences or experiences of ones in your family. And I can tell you, in terms of my mom, when she saw her period the first time, she just recognized that her menstruation was there. She didn't know what it was, right? She didn't know what to do. She went and showed her mother, and her mother just said, you know what? Put this on, and that means from now on, you have to stay away from men. How does that help? You know what I mean? So if I'm inquisitive now, I'm saying, stay away from men, why? And then that whole process downhill starts to take place. You know what I mean? So these are things that we learn from instead of running away from it. If your children ask, where do babies come from? Oh, they're delivered at the front step. Persons still say that, mind you. Or they're brought by a stalk. I heard that up to 2 days ago. that a stork brings the baby and drops the baby at the front door, because you're just not sure what to say. So don't worry, after today's session, you'll be well equipped. So when we look at sexual debut, and by sexual debut, we mean the child's or the adolescent's or the adult's first sexual encounter, we recognize that it is tailored by many things, or it is affected by many things. So social media use, we recognize that almost everything these days has a sexual connotation, all right? You have to be very careful. Sometimes you're watching something and something else pops up. If your child or adolescent is not appropriately equipped, then they will quickly switch over to that which is not healthy, okay? We recognize the whole issue of emotional well-being and body image. So adolescents and even our younger children have challenges with our body image issues. And you can see here, this individual here, she's not considered to have won a lot of weight, but when she looks at herself in the mirror, she's really seeing someone who is obese. And so she has challenges with her body image. So you can imagine if Mary Jane comes across and insults her, or what we call, body shames her to say that, she has on too much weight. But then the right Mr. Handsome comes along and says, oh, you're fine, you're looking good, etc. Then that person's whole body image, is uplifted by the young man who is giving the compliments. And so again, there's this relevant identity with that person. You feel drawn to that person. And it is then easier for that teenager to have their sexual debut because this young man is now giving me a better body image. And so I'm going to go along with whatever it is that he wants. And then there are other contextual factors. Okay, the whole issue of affluence, structure, and support. And it has been proven that families that are not as affluent may have different types of exposure, and therefore the risk of having an earlier sexual debut or initiation are more likely, okay? So we're looking at the whole issue of even emotional wellness. If I keep saying to my child, you're dumb, you're stupid, you're good for nothing, that kind of thing, but the right person comes along and says, you're beautiful, you have the potential to do well. Here's one thing that can assist you in doing even better. So if they have a feeling of more emotional well-being with that particular person, then you can see that they're more likely to start having sex, even though the age may be inappropriate. So family structure, level of support, wealth or their affluence, the influence of social media, the issue of body image and emotional wellness are all factors that will contribute to sex initiation. Okay, and so are you ready? This is the time where we get a little bit interactive. And so I'm gonna try to see if persons can answer me at this point in time. Here we go. What do you say? I want persons to, okay, the session is being recorded. How do we get creative here? Because persons may not want to give their answers since they're being recorded. So what I'll do is, it's fine. We will do a little quiz at the end. I'll just proceed. So 13 to 24 months. At this point in time, you should name the body parts by their correct names, okay? I don't want to offend anyone in this particular instance. So I will not give the particular names that are used based on our local context, but you can utilize your mind's eye in thinking back on some of the names that you would have heard as children. And you definitely know that these names are not correct. You need to tell your children, vagina, penis, those are the correct names that should be utilized. It enables better communication. So if, for example, somebody inappropriately touches the child in that particular area, they're better able to communicate to you that someone has touched me there, or that particular area is itching, hurting. So health issues can be appropriately identified and definitely abuse. You need to emphasize that the genitals or genitalia are normal, but they are private. So boys have penises, girls have vagina. That is normal, but guess what? That is one of your private areas. We're going to highlight other areas that are private because it's not only the vagina and the penis that are private, but also your anus and your mouth as well. Okay? So they should know the difference between being male and female at the age of 13, between the age of 13 to 24 months. So that's important. And so all of this that is outlined here, this is sex health education, but it is developmentally appropriate. So at this point in time, we're not going to be saying, about the penis and vagina coming together to form a baby, etc. That's not appropriate here. At 13 to 24 months, all you're doing is emphasizing the appropriate names of their private areas. And you're also emphasizing that, yes, this is normal, but this is also private, and emphasize that this makes you male and this makes you female. Now, very importantly, toddlers love to explore. And by toddler, we mean from the ages of 1 to 3 years. And so it is natural for them to touch their private parts. Okay, many times a parent may walk into a room and recognize that the toddler is touching their vagina, for example, and then they basically start to beat the child. Okay, that unfortunately is inappropriate. Instead, the necessary guidance should be given that, this is your private area and you should not be touching it at this point in time. Okay, so please be guided accordingly. 2 to 4 years. We're looking at the guides to basic reproduction. So when I asked, so I have 2 girls, one is 6 going on 7, and the other, she's basically 4 going on 40. So I asked her, where do children come from? She said, the shop, right? And I was like, the shop? Okay, so which shop did you come from? And where did your sister come from? So because I was studying in Jamaica for my postgraduate degree, she said, well, that one was one from in Jamaica. So she said she came from a Jamaican shop, and I came, she called one of the name of the local stores here. I came from that particular shop. You know what I mean? And boy, poor me as a pediatrician, I was embarrassed. I'm like, oh dear, it seems like I missed the boat as well, right? And then the whole issue of culture becomes important because my brother's daughter, she lives in Norway, said, where do babies come from? And she said, well, something from mommy comes together with something from daddy, and then the baby comes into mommy's tummy. Okay, so it's very important for the 2 to 4 year old child that you emphasize the whole issue of egg coming from mommy, sperm coming from daddy, they come together, they grow in the mommy's tummy. You may not need to utilize the word uterus, okay? And then really and truly, younger children are less interested in the whole issue of sex. They're more interested, okay, where did babies come from? Where are they? So for the 2 to 4 year old, you can simply say, the egg from mommy or something from mommy and something from that. They come together, baby grows inside of mommy's tummy. And then after time, when the baby is fully developed, then the baby comes. That is their interest, okay? Less so in the act of sex. And again, here, you want to establish that you must get permission to touch. So the whole issue of ownership of body, okay? Of course, you highlight that there's special permission that is given to parents and healthcare providers, but even then, we give them red flags. If it feels wrong, it likely is wrong, and you let another adult know, because you do know that in this day and age, even parents, unfortunately, persons who should be in positions of trust have also broken that trust and have gone to the side of abuse. So we go to the whole issue of good touch, bad touch principle. And I dare say that this has been adjusted as well. So it's no longer just good touch and bad touch, even that's what you will see highlighted in the literature. There's also the unwanted touch. So I may be friends with Johnny. Right now, I do not want you to hold my hand. And the child should understand that the unwanted touch is perfectly fine because it builds their ability to say no, especially when there is a bad touch. So again, before touching or hugging others, the children at 2 to 4 years of age should recognize you need to ask, okay? You don't just go up and hug somebody else. Is it okay? I want to give you a hug. You look for some sort of, sign to say, yes, the person is in agreement with receiving a hug, and then you proceed, okay? So again, remember, anyway, I'm gonna ask you a quiz at the end, so we'll move on. Boundaries are important to be established at the age of 2 to 4. 5 to 8 years, the whole issue of privacy must be understood. And here we're speaking about God's ideas. So we're not going to speak about what the world speaks about. Here we're going to be teaching our 5 to 8 year olds about heterosexuality, Men going with women. That is God's ideal, and that is what we're going to teach. Okay, so again, you can explore the concept of puberty at the age of 8 years. Okay, so remember that these children are now becoming online savvy. They know not to talk to strangers, or they should know not to talk to strangers rather, and they should know what to do if an inappropriate picture comes up. Okay, so usually for my children, even for the one who is 4 going on 40, if something comes up, she'll say, "Mommy, this is on the screen now. Is it okay?" And I will say yes, or I will say no. Or sometimes when the 6-year-old, is watching something that she thinks is inappropriate, she will come and say, "Mommy," I'll use her initials since we're recording, "MJ is watching adult stuff." And so you should quickly see me jumping up to go and look to see what is happening. Sometimes it's not something that is necessarily inappropriate. It may more feature adult characters, but she has recognized it is outside of my league. So let me go and call mommy to make sure that it's something that we should be watching. So again, they must be online savvy. They should know the ideal of God, which is heterosexuality. They should understand privacy. And again, you must speak about the whole issue of puberty. All right, we do have children that go into puberty even from the age of 8 years. Okay, we're talking about having, your menstrual cycle. We're talking about the whole issue of having nighttime erections, your nighttime emissions, etc. All right, 9 to 12 years. This is the time for you to reinforce. So remember, we said that anything you do after the age of 8 is corrective. So you're correcting any misconceptions, or you're trying to reinforce that which is correct. Believe it or not, as I said before, especially in school, children are already hearing and seeing from others what they deem to be right regarding sex education. All right, so you're re-emphasizing that which is already learned. And here you go a little bit further. With a 9 to 12-year-old, you're going to speak about the possibility of being pregnant. Because we said, remember, they may already start having their menstruation. So you're going to speak about the possibility of pregnancy. The basic information about serious infections, your sexually transmitted infections. We're going to say, yes, there's contraception, but we are preaching abstinence, because guess what? Abstinence is the only that is 100% effective. And by abstinence, we're speaking about not having sex. We need to speak about the whole issue of peer pressure. And we need to again emphasize the whole issue of internet safety, bullying, sexting, okay? Believe it or not, our teenagers these days are sexting. They're sending pictures of their private parts to others. And sometimes it may be very difficult for a teenager who does not have that appropriate background to then appropriately respond, either to block the person and report it to the necessary persons. Again, healthy versus unhealthy relationships. The whole issue, as we said, of bullying, the whole issue of mental health. So you may have an individual who speaks down to their friends, and that can tend to build on that whole negativity of relationships. But guess what? It may not be unusual for some children, because that is what happens in the home, between the parent and the child, between mommy and daddy. So when we're looking at childhood development, you have that indirect impact based on what the child observes. You have the direct impact based on what the parent says. So 2 very important concepts, okay? And I need to say here as well that teens are private. Remember, we said that they start to pull away from their parents. They're moving from being dependent to relative independence. So really and truly, they're going to be very squeamish if you start talking to them about the private parts and so on at that age, which is why it's so important to start building that rapport from earlier up. 13 to 18, again, menstruation, nocturnal emissions, healthy versus unhealthy relationships. We speak GBV simply means gender-based violence. And again, you're going to equip them with the appropriate skills to negotiate and to refuse. They should be open to questions, and the parents should be knowledgeable about body image issues and self-harm. Now, I must say here that self-harm is very common, not only in our Caribbean region, but internationally. And what you find with teenagers now, one of their coping mechanisms is cutting, okay? So usually what I have on my watch here, but they cut along the wrist here. but they recognize now that persons are looking in those areas for cutting. And so instead of cutting horizontally, they cut this way along the lines of the skin, and they also cut in between the thighs. So usually when I meet a teenager, in the clinic, basically when I shake their hand, and it's not difficult because I'm here, but when I shake their hand this way, I basically gently turn their hand. So if I'm shaking, so this is my right hand, I'll be shaking the opposite hand for them. I simply turn their hand gently and look. Many times they don't recognize what I'm looking for, but I'm looking to see, is there any evidence of cutting? Very common, utilizes the coping skills in our teenagers, and it's usually a cry for help. It is really more common in girls than in boys. All right, I should have, just to ask you permission here, I'm going to reshare my screen because I need to share the audio, and I'm not sure if I clicked it the first time. So here, we're very big on health education at the Mount St. John's Medical Center, which is the hospital at which I practice. And so we do create videos from time to time. This particular video was created by the department through Dr. Richardson. And so I'm going to share with you here one of our sex health education videos, especially in terms of focusing on good touch and bad touch. It's not very long, and I'm hoping that with time, even in terms of our churches, that we can have videos such as these, which basically help our children to understand the difference between good and bad touch. And this was geared towards our kids.
Hi kids, I'm Dr. Richardson, consultant pediatrician at the Mount St. John's Medical Center, and I'm here to talk to you about good touch and bad touch. Good touch is also known as safe touch. Do you know what that is? Good touch or safe touch is any touch that makes you feel comfortable, happy, and loved. Like hugs and kisses from your family, a high five from your friends, or a pat on the back from the teacher or your coach. So what is bad touch or unsafe touch? Bad touch or unsafe touch is any touch that makes you feel uncomfortable, scared, sad, or guilty. This can be when someone forces you to kiss them, or someone forces a kiss on you, or being touched on your private parts, or someone forcing you to touch them on their private parts. So what can you do to protect yourself? Here are some rules you can follow. Rule 1. Know your private parts. Your private parts are the areas that are covered by your swimsuit. These are your chest, the area between your legs, and your bottom. These areas are your no-touch zones, and you need to keep them safe. It is okay for your parents to touch your private parts when they are bathing you or dressing you. It is also okay for a doctor to examine your private parts, but only when your parents are present. If anyone else touches your private parts or asks you to touch their private parts, tell them,
"No, stop."
Run away from the bad person and find somebody to tell. Rule number 2, tell a grown-up. This can be your parents, your teacher, your coach, or anyone else you trust. You must always speak up until someone listens to you. Remember, this is not your fault. You may be given gifts or asked not to tell anyone and keep it a secret, but you still have to tell. Rule number 3, learn your address and important phone numbers. This will help you so you can find your safe place and a grown-up to tell so that they can help you. Hope you can remember these rules, and you can always share them with your friends. Talk to your parents today about good touch and bad touch. And remember,
Don't keep it a secret.
this is a public service announcement from the pediatric. Hi Hi kids, I'm Dr. Richardson, president of the Mount St. John's Medical Center.
Okay, so are you hearing me? Okay, great. So basically you can see that sex health education has taken place there. Very simple, 2 minutes, just emphasizing good touch versus bad touch. Now we recognize that there are significant barriers and we're looking to wrap up now so that we can facilitate questions. Many parents do not engage in sex health education because they deem it a bit embarrassing. You know, I just cannot afford to speak with my child about this thing. I'm not comfortable. Some persons believe that, you know what, I do not have enough knowledge. I really don't. Suppose they ask a question that I cannot answer, you know. Sometimes there is an underestimation of a child's sexual behavior. Oh, he or she is too young. Remember, we spoke about the whole fact of toddlers being so, you know, inquisitive, etc., that sometimes they touch their own privates and sometimes they also want to see the other child's private parts. So just as a part of their natural development, they're already showing a high interest in the areas that are considered to be private. Religious and cultural beliefs, again, you know, as a Christian, I cannot talk to my child about sex. And the whole issue of perceived low self-efficacy. Again, I am not confident in my ability to appropriately handle this topic. So I wanted to look at an article from the Adventist Review in terms of telling our children about sex. Whose job is it? And the author, Mr. Handisides, basically outlines some very key points, and I'll share them with you here. Many parents abdicate the responsibility. Basically, you say, you know, it's not my responsibility to tell the child. I'm going to wait until they get to school and they do health ed or sex ed, and hopefully they'll learn about it then. All right. Again, the emphasis was made that telling your child is important and modeling is equally crucial. And by modeling, we speak about that relationship between mother and father, that relationship between the parent and child. You must show that there is love. You should show that there's mutual support. You should show that whole element of nurture. You know, Daddy, I love you. You look awesome today. You know what I mean? Children really feed off of what they see. And again, we're doing that which God intended. We're representing God in our home. Again, we're going to be answering questions simply and unambiguously. Just give a basic answer. Where do babies come from? Depending on the age, you can say from mommy's tummy, if you don't want to yet go into egg and sperm coming together and so on, but definitely should not be at the front door at the shop, like my children thought. Take ample time. Raising your children is not an overnight scenario, right? You have to take time to appropriately guide, to pay attention to their cues. You have to be that authoritative parent so that you can have the best outcomes and be that responsive parent as well. Again, we're emphasizing, and the author here is emphasizing, that sex health education is really more than just talking about that which is physical, the physical act. It's more about speaking about the biology, the structure of the body, the whole issue of the mental wellness, the whole issue of the relational wellness. And we spoke about the definition before. And this book was recommended by the author, and it's probably something that you can look into, Human Sexuality, Showing the Wonder of God's Gift with Your Children by Ron and Karen Flowers. Okay, so in summary, as we strive to facilitate questions, parents are central to childhood development. Sex health education must begin at home, right? And remember, we're saying that you can start as early from 1 to 2 years, just identifying the body parts. It should be developmentally appropriate. It does not increase the rates of sex initiation. It must be accurate and holistic, okay? Emphasize good and bad touch, but not only that, but also unwanted touch, which is a new sphere I want to bring in here, the good, the bad, and the unwanted touch from very early. Again, establishing the whole issue of boundaries. Even in the touch, which is good, but which is not desired or wanted at that particular point in time, it still takes a village to raise a child. So again, you're not alone. It's not to say that the home is the only form of instruction that the child will receive. It should happen in your doctor's office for wellness visits. And that's another story altogether, because sometimes children only go to the doctor when they're ill, and we want to see them when they're well, right? So it will happen at the doctor's office, right? And again, some doctors may not be as comfortable, but we have to be. It should happen within the church sphere, okay? Within the pathfinding age group. Sometimes the complete tween and all those things happen more in, in the older classes, your Voyager and your guides, but we really have to revisit the whole curriculum in terms of making sure that these things are properly covered coming through. And it really should be covered, you know what I mean, in the schools, okay? And then ask God for wisdom. After all, he's the source of all wisdom. So ask him to guide you. Ask him to give you the gift of discernment. Show me, Lord, how do I appropriately, cover this topic with my child? How do I appropriately pick up the red flags that my child has had his or her sexual debut? You know what I mean? But what we have to do is really not only ask God for wisdom, but we also have to act based on knowledge that we have received. And remember that anything that is done after the age of 8 years is corrective. If you are starting sex health education after the age of 8, you have started way too late. And it is going to be a challenge, because once they hit that age of 10, they start withdrawing from you. They start becoming more private, and it's even more difficult to have that sort of conversation with them as you go along. I must say, when we see adolescents in the clinic as I close, we do have a one-on-one interaction with them, okay? So believe it or not, we speak with the parent and the child together first. Then we speak to the mommy alone, and then we speak to the child alone. We don't do the opposite way, because if you speak to the child alone, and then speak to the mommy alone, then that child or adolescent is going to say, you know what? She just told my mother everything that I told her. You know what I mean? So we have this sort of pact, and we go through what is called a HEADS questionnaire. We go through the home environment, H, E for education, A for the child's activities, D for drugs, S for sexual orientation, initiation, activity, etc., and S for suicidal ideation. So whenever we see an adolescent, we utilize that opportunity to go through the HEADS questionnaire so that we can appropriately pick up anything that is concerning to the child. Okay, so again, sex health education can be done by all of us. It's never too late to learn, and it's not something that we should be uncomfortable with, but rather something that we should be empowered about so that we can do it appropriately